So I.
So.
So I.
It'd be nice to get.
So we asked that yesterday
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they said
The last property.
it would be a future grant
Well, I mean,
at a later point if we wanted to try to prove that we want money to move it, but they said like, they really don't do that for Parks and Rec. It, you know, that seems optional and it is. We could get some, we will get some funding to replace, like, what we're not moving is like the skateboard park, so we can get funding to rebuild that exactly as is. But they will only pay to rebuild something exactly where it is in the same spot, which is kind of ironic, because it's like, okay, it's just gonna flood again. So I think we'll be making, I'm gonna talk to staff, like, let's make, I don't know that, you know, with our plans, it doesn't make sense to rebuild it, but it looks like we should get reimbursed for staff time during the flood, so, but it's gonna take a long time.
Us for a joint workshop for the Wabasha City Council and Wabasha Port Authority. And I have the great pleasure of welcoming everybody. Robin Walton is actually the esteemed chair of this committee, but she is on her way and she'll probably get here just as I start to talk. But needless to say, I was going to do the closing remarks, which I'll just tell you now. And that is that this has just been a really fundamentally important thing that's happened related to everything that's important to me with regards to this community, with regards to our economy, our schools, the viability of having a quality of life here. It all stems back to housing. I know that from personal experience. When we moved here, we had everything a person could wish for with regards to housing. We had equity and a great house in the cities. I had an excellent job. Scott was getting an excellent job. And we struggled to find housing. And I've heard that story time and time again. When we recruited Caroline, she felt the same pressure. When Meg was recruited, she felt the same pressure. I'm trying to look around. Maybe Corey and Molly can tell a story. It's just been an ongoing issue for probably the better part of 20 years. I think maybe it's just caught on in the recent decade that people realize this is not our problem. It is a global problem. It's certainly a national problem. It's very much a local and regional problem and a state problem. So the CR community actually initiating work on this, and certainly there has been activity, including Centra's development of Eagles Basin, which is really showing its promise, and I think, or I should say, delivering on its promise. But this is the most orchestrated effort that I'm aware of that has happened in the last 20 years. And so it's really important to have had as many community stakeholders at the table as we have. And with Kathy Peterson, if you don't know Kathy, she's with us to work on economic development. She comes to us from CEDA, which is Community Economic Development Associates. And she immediately helped us with this idea that housing was core and central to the viability of our community. She also comes with a lot of background working on housing in other communities, Lanesboro, Prescott, Yoda, where else have you worked on here?
Been a realtor too.
And she's great. She's a broker realtor, so she understands, you know,
Graduates in affordable housing.
a very big part of housing, which is the costs and what
Yeah.
cost laws for entry into housing. Affordable housing is a term that I think people have come to realize the actual meaning of. It doesn't mean subsidized housing. It means housing is affordable for anyone living at a particular income level. A senior might have a particular need for affordable housing based on the fact that they're not waging anymore and they have a capped income they have to expend on housing. We all are kind of mindful of about that 30% of our overall income that we should be spending on housing, and a lot of people are spending more than that. And that's, again, not unique to Wabasha, but it's a serious problem, especially for families starting to get off on the right track with additional costs related to daycare and other pressing family costs. And certainly it's an issue for seniors as well, and everybody in between. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been at the table, and please, you'll listen along and interject if you can think of anybody I'm forgetting, because lots of people have joined us along the way. But core to the group is the group that started right from the get-go when Kathy said, I think we should start a housing committee, and Robin Baldwin said, I will happily chair that. And we started looking for people who would be participant. We've had Robin and Kathy, Jay Jewson, Jeff Sulla, myself, Tom Crowley from Benson St. Elizabeth, Buffy Baranek from Centra, Michael Plant from the county, Sandra Allaire, Jim Root, Kari McCann, Dave Woodley, Meg Damish Tucker, Wendy Bush, Jim Freihammer, Don Jacoby, and Nathan Woodworth, and of course, Ben, who joined us more recently, also from CEDA, has also been participant.
We just had a real host of stakeholders taking interest and start attending our meetings, which has been fantastic, from, you know, Habitat for Humanity to the area agency, and it's just wonderful. They encouraged us to do stakeholder analysis, and here we are getting some people involved.
Right, so we've come to this moment because of a number of things. First, also at Catholic urging, Wabasha has, or I should say Wabasha area team for community housing has participated in the Minnesota Housing Institute. So that's been a structured, has it been quarterly or even more frequent?
Well, we get together, absolutely, every other month.
Yeah,
For 2 days.
Our local group gets together monthly. If it's something that interests you, you can join us at 11 o'clock on the first Wednesday of the month. We meet at Robin's office, because there's a big, nice boardroom table there. But the Institute group has gone every other month to Rochester to meet with 2 other communities, is at Wanamingo and Winona, right? Sorry, W's?
There's 4.
No,
There's 4, okay.
yeah, there's 4 of us.
I remember the 3 W's. So anyway, we're cohorted with other communities, and every community has its own unique approach to housing. So Wabasha has focused on our approach, which is identifying a broad array of strategies. And we know that housing is needed across all sort of types and levels of costs. So with that, Kathy also sought and was awarded funding from the Southwest Minnesota Initiative Foundation, some additional funds toward this to hire a consultant, and we've hired Stantec, and Tom will introduce himself soon. So Tom Layton and his team have conducted a housing analysis and housing study of our community. We hadn't really ever had one officially done, and the most recent data, which was pretty meager, was I think in 2016.
Yeah,
Maybe even, and that's referencing the current comprehensive plan, which is also a 2016
which we
plan.
rehashed
Right.
continually.
So it's really critical for us to have current data and be able to kind of wrap our arms around what our community is and what we need, and that's pretty much everything. So you may be a little overwhelmed, which we were as a group. But what I was gonna say at the end, and I'll say it again to anybody who comes late, is I want to hang on to these strategies and not be too concerned about whittling away down to one or two that we think are really doable. The reason for that is somebody's gonna be referencing this plan in 5 and 10 and 20 years, and hopefully we'll have another housing study done in that period, but small communities struggle to find the funding to continuously do analysis. So with this, I want to have any future council member, any future superintendent, any future citizen, any future business owner be able to reference this plan and say, wow, there's a lot of potential strategies that are suitable for Wabasha and the surrounding community. And so with that, I mean, it probably made Caroline had her blood pressure go up for a few days when it's like, what are we going to do? How many of these can we really accomplish? And that's what I'd ask you to think about. And I'll also ask you to write down any questions you have or comments or enthusiastic suggestions. If you can jot those down as we speak so that Tom can give a continuous presentation, then we'll have those collected and Caroline will sort of, maybe overlapping questions, we'll sort of parse through those as the presentation goes on. But what I'd love to know is, what do you think is achievable? We're looking for low hanging fruit. We don't have a lot of funds to dedicate to housing at this time, but long-term, what are opportunities with regards to, for instance, the housing trust? So there's a lot of sort of points at which I can see some of these being activated now all the way through, maybe something that has more of a 10 to 20 year timeline associated with it. And certainly anybody who's watched the development of Eagles Basin knows that housing just isn't developed rapidly overnight at a large scale, but it will take a great deal of work to make any significant amount of development occur. And with that, we will also have, and maybe Kathy will say more about this at the end, housing summit toward the, do we have a date yet?
It'll probably be the second week of August.
Targeting the second week of August for actual developers. Tom has also kind of been touching base with developers that he knows that are in the space doing the kind of projects that we would be interested in, but trying to attract developers to the community to show them what public and private parcels we might have available, what tools we might make available to those developers, whether it be TIF or some restructuring of ordinance language that might be overly restrictive, and also just to have them aware there's a great deal of enthusiasm working on this issue in the community. So I won't say anything further, but don't be afraid to write down your.
Does anyone
questions and
need a
otherwise.
note card? Yes, we'd love for you to just take down some questions and comments for discussion later. And just to let you know, Dean Moyer is online and Brian Woodley is tied up in a job, but he's gonna join online or get the presentation later. So I think we're all
Thank you.
well
So with
accounted
that,
for.
we have a warm welcome for Tom. He's been here several times in the community as he's been conducting this analysis, and we're so glad he can be here in person today. Thanks, Tom.
And I'm really happy to be here as well. And I love the number of people that showed up. A lot of people interested in housing, and I think it relates to what Mayor Emily said at the outset. And I love the way you set this up, Mayor, that this is all intertwined with the future of your community. If you can stimulate the growth of additional housing of different kinds, if you can meet community needs, grow your population, you're supporting your businesses, you're supporting your schools, you're supporting your tax base. So there are all kinds of ways that this strengthens your community if these become effective strategies. The other thing I liked about what the mayor said is that these challenges are widespread. Communities are grappling with them all over. And I think communities are having, and sometimes you have the conversation about what's possible with some approaches that they could take, and they look pretty hard and not a lot happen. So I think as a sort of a collection of communities around Minnesota, we're finding our way slowly to the realization that for there to be visible progress and significant progress, we have to rethink what we're willing to do. That may be in terms of some funding support, and maybe in terms of public sector roles. So we'll be talking about this as we go along. But I think we're in the process of, and we are seeing case studies and examples of communities that are doing just that, and then sort of pioneering the way to being more entrepreneurial, more proactive, and seeing some effects of that. And I think those models are going to become widespread. So I liked the reference to how widespread the challenge is, and I wanted to add to that we have to think about doing things in different ways. That's part of what can change this dynamic. The last thing I wanted to sort of piggyback on what the mayor said was this group, this community group that you have. I have worked in the last 2 years in a similar community, Janesville, to Minneapolis suburbs, New Brighton and Shoreview, Beloit, Wisconsin, on housing studies. A community in Texas called Farmers Branch, north of Dallas. Not one of them had the engagement of a group of people that cared about the housing situation, how they're seeing needs not being met, that they want to see met, how they'd like to support housing growth of different types, how they're educating themselves on both on the situation in Wabasha and what the potential solutions that is. And that's a resource that pays dividends for action in just a lot of different ways. Part of, as you know, part of doing things differently means you have to have community support for that. You have and consensus for that. So that's a resource for understanding the situation, talking to neighbors, building that community support. As well as they've been coming back from these workshops with new ideas that we've been plugging into this toolkit, sort of in real time. So it's just a great energy and we're really grateful to them. So the process so far has been doing the research, having a workshop with this committee, this active committee, stakeholder group, about the research. Developing a set of, so from that and from input we've heard from different parties, sort of identifying needs and opportunities. So developing a set of strategies around those opportunities and those needs. Having a workshop with that committee around those needs. Pulling that then into the report that you've seen, which essentially is the analysis and the strategies. And now sort of teeing it up for your consideration as a city council in a more direct way and giving you an opportunity to say, well, this confused me, or how does that work? Or, I don't like that, or I do like that, or how do we get going on that? So that's the conversation we have an opportunity to have today. I'm gonna step through sort of the background material. Some of it I'm just gonna go through I've got an awful lot of slides here, but intentionally, I know with sets of these slides that I'm gonna step through really pretty quickly just to give you a flavor of the categories of research. And there are probably some in the community that are showing up here that haven't seen this, so it might be new to some of you. Some of it's captured on these boards, so you can take some time and go look at the boards. But at any rate, I'll go through some of the research and some of the key messages or takeaways that I think the research says. I'll go through the strategies. I won't talk about all of them. We know from our meetings that can take a while to really break those down and talk about what they look like. But I've pulled out a few of those strategies to give some attention to. If there are others that you want to talk about, and and time allows in our discussion, I've got them here too, and we certainly can look to those. So that's how I see this playing out, and then a discussion after that. I sometimes don't know as a consultant. I'm sort of wired to collect a lot of information, not be very directive about, recommendations, sort of tee up a bunch of options, and then I sort of feel like I've done my job. In this case, I might be going a little further than that. I might be saying, if it's your intention to grow the way that we think it's possible for you to grow, I would recommend you do this set of things, and you think about creating a funding tool that helps you to do that, and those kind of things. So if I'm, too much on the recommendation side, not enough on the just here's some options side, I'm telling you ahead of time. That's where I might be going. But anyway, it's all, I think you're going to find it all really interesting, food for thought. So moving ahead. So the agenda is analysis, strategies, and discussion. I wanted to express appreciation to the people I've worked with, and it really has been a pleasure to be here, working with Mayor Emily, with Caroline, with Kathy, most closely, but also other Wabasha staff and the really engaged watch committee. So really appreciate that. And obviously, as I said, that's a real resource for you going forward. The research I've broken into a few different sections. One of the things we do is we want to look at what kind of housing do you have already? Where is it? This is a base map that just shows the areas in Wabasha that are zoned for residential. We start to layer on and identify where are your current affordable housing projects. This is a certain type of affordable housing that is meeting the needs of some folks and might be distinct from some other types of affordable or workforce housing we're going to talk about later. But you've got a couple of existing apartment buildings that are meeting some needs for lower income residents here. You've got a couple of senior housing facilities. You're missing some that some communities have. There isn't an independent living senior community or an assisted living senior community. Both of these are skilled care facilities. Although I think the mayor was telling me that there are some assisted living beds with the hospital as well. So we still may want to beef that up a little on the map. But anyway, so you've got some senior housing facilities. In rural communities like this, smaller communities like this, sometimes the senior housing developers have a hard time being confident that, a continuum of care facility like they might build somewhere else is going to have enough demand. So sometimes the senior needs to move to a lower maintenance lifestyle is met by just market rate apartments that are built so that they're senior friendly, but they're not restricted to seniors. You've got one major condominium building down by the river. You've got 3 mobile home parks. I think this is an important resource. It's your most affordable ownership option in Wabasha. 3 campgrounds, which I understand may really actually represent housing in some cases for folks that, they live out of their campers up north in the summer, south in the winter. Now, I know some of those are here for, occupied by people who are also using them in a more traditional recreational sense, but including them as part of the housing format, because I think you have some non-traditional formats here where some people are actually, this is their home. I know that we're at the end of a corner in my house in South Minneapolis, and it's a little bit of a quiet corner, and we have people come and once in a while, because it's a quiet corner, and they're living in a truck across the street or a car across the street, and we'll see them there for a month. So a lot of people live in this economy living in non-traditional venues. Your marinas, also for some, it's where people live. Maybe it's just seasonally, but for some, maybe it's not. At any rate, another sort of housing related resource, and this map puts it together. So that's a little bit of a scan of and obviously you've got a lot of single family neighborhoods. Your era of construction is pretty old. I was looking at your the census, and I think by about 1900, you were pretty close to where you are today. So you've got a lot of homes that were built a long time ago, and I know some of that has been replaced over time. But anyway, you've got a lot of single family homes here as well, and some other formats. This is just a slide of 3 publicly owned sites that it's one of the focus areas of the watch committee is these are owned by the city or a related organization. How do we tee these up so we can get developer interest to this? It's a little bit low hanging fruit if it's already in city ownership. So that's the location, and those have been areas of focus. These are some takeaways from the inventory part of the research. The vast majority of your housing is single family homes. You also have twin homes, townhomes, smaller apartment buildings, and some of the range of other housing that you've seen. There hasn't been any new apartment development in Wabasha for quite a while. That's common in communities this size, but some communities this size are getting some new apartment development, and it's higher quality stuff. It's rents like that might be surprising to you. Pretty high rents for those market rate apartments. So those are some of the takeaways in the inventory. We like to think about what's driving housing demand, and this chart just shows population growth. This is not the one I wanted to show. Oh well. But anyway, in the upper right, it shows sort of a flat population trajectory since 2010. But in terms of employment growth, it has been significant. Since 2000, you could see it's been, I don't know, 300 jobs. What's that? 25% growth in employment. And we know that this chart, I think, is even more important. This shows the number of people coming in to Wabasha to work versus the number of people who live in Wabasha and are going out of Wabasha to work. So you've got a real influx of people who are working in Wabasha. And that's just a really important target market for building housing for those folks, because some of those folks that come into Wabasha to work, if they had the housing that suits them, would likely just want to live here and work here. I could have a sidebar on just what an attractive community it feels like to me. And I think I did do a sort of a map with some that layered on a lot of the amenities here that I used as a tool to reach out to developers and remind them. So this is Wabasha. This is some of the things that's going for it. And, just waterfront community and nice traditional Main Street and layers of other amenities here that make it an attractive place. This is a view that just shows, I'm going to circle this area, just shows an economy that, over a quarter of the jobs are in the healthcare sector. So this, but it's a little bit of a regional economy in terms of the healthcare and public administration jobs as well. So those are your two leading economic components. So takeaways is just what I talked about: steady population over the years, but a real employment center with medical services and public administration being your anchors. So that's really your key driver, or one of your key drivers, in addition to the quality of life that you continue to foster here, because people like to live in communities like this, where there's a quality of life and these kind of walkable amenities. There's water, there's a beach. So that's your other driver, is your quality of life. I'm going to race through these, and I'm not going to interpret them a lot, but we did a set of, we like to understand the demographics of a community, because that tells us who, a good part of who we're building for is the people who are already here, right? Giving them options that they might not have. Seniors sometimes are occupying some of these older homes and might like to move to a different place that requires less maintenance if there was a good option. Now that frees up a single family home for someone else. So we want to understand the composition of the community. And let's see So what I would highlight in your age group is it's a fairly old community, fairly old demographic compared to the mix that we're seeing. And so each of these charts have some peer communities, and then they compare it to Wabasha County and the state of Minnesota. Your workforce is not skewed in the same way. So as you're providing housing so more people who work at the hospital can live here, you're going to be attracting more families. You're going to be attracting more younger professionals. You're going to be balancing your demographics in a healthy way. We also want to keep in mind that we want to provide options for those seniors so that there are options that might be attracted to them. And that might be new patio homes. It might be, as I said, apartments. But that's part of the market we should be building towards. The household types, I've got that circled up here as well to show that just an awful lot of the households in Wabasha are single person households. I don't know what that's, a little over 40%. Less family households than most of the comparison communities. You're filling that in your schools, I think. You've got a mix of ownership and rental households. And that looks pretty consistent with some of the other communities. This is a chart that shows housing cost burden. So these are households that are reporting on a census form that their incomes are such and so, and their housing costs are such and so. And if those housing costs are over 30% of their income, they're considered housing cost burdened. Because you're getting to a point, particularly if you're a lower income household, those housing costs are fixed. You can't get out from under them. And everything else, all your other living expenses have to be paid out of what's left. So households that are paying more than 30% of their incomes on housing costs are considered cost burden because it constrains the rest of their spending. And these, within each of these income brackets, so these are each income brackets defined down here for owner households and for renter households. Within each of these income brackets, we're showing what percentage folks, in this case, who own a home and are earning $20,000 to $35,000 a year, 65% of that income and ownership bracket are housing cost burden. So it sort of gives you a big picture in Wabasha. You know, it's those who are earning less, the green and the red brown, are those that tend to have a lot of folks that are housing cost burdened, whether they're renters or owners. The other thing we did, and again, you know, you could spend 5 or 10 minutes sorting out these charts, but I want to at least tell you the exercise we went through here. We were able to build a pretty detailed sense of the household mix in Wabasha through buying some data sources, and got to a very detailed level in what kind of housing was offered. And then we lined them up according to the affordability of the housing that's offered. Blue is ownership, red to orange is rental. This is the housing that's offered. That's the income levels of those who rent and who own. And based on that analysis, we can say, well, there's a deficit in units that cost less than $500 compared to people that earn less than $500. There's a deficit in this category. There's a deficit in these categories. And I'm going to just, that means different in different parts of the chart, and just like pretend you never heard this after you leave here, so it doesn't hurt your brain. But I'm going to circle 2 of these areas. One is over here, that there's a deficit that says there's higher earning people, and there's a deficit in the ownership housing, they're blue, the ownership housing that they could afford. Now, some of those might be perfectly happy to be in less expensive ownership housing. So maybe that's not a problem, but it's also might be a signal that there's a demand for some executive level housing, and you are seeing it happen. It's not necessarily happening in Wabasha proper, it's happening up on the hill, you know, but so there may be some demand for that. Oh, the other one I was going to show is these the tan or the orange color where there's a deficit. This isn't surprising in lower income households having enough housing that rents are less than $500. There are some, but a lot of those have to end up in the next category, spending $500 or $750, so it's a little more than they can afford. So it reinforces some of the things we talked about in the previous slide. I've talked about this. I'm not going to walk through this again. I think I need to move on a little bit. We looked at other indicators of housing demand. This is just the production in Wabasha since 2015. And the green is single family homes. So, you know, there's been a steady, modest amount of construction. This represents your current demand for housing. This pattern, and you've got another new subdivision, and that pattern is of a modest amount of growth is continuing. That is your demand for housing under current conditions. We talk about, is there potential demand if conditions were different? And we'll be talking about that. But this you can think of as your current demand. That trajectory will just be continued if, if things stay the same. There is apartment development. I think I touched on this already. There is apartment development that is occurring in small communities like Wabasha in different locations. There's a few developers that have figured out how to do this. They have a model for doing this. There is a public sector participation in supporting those projects, but those are being done. So we looked at what those are. We captured some of the characteristics of some of those projects as part of this project. So those are all case studies for bringing in, market rate apartment development in Wabasha. And this chart just shows, like other places, the increase in value and sale price. Housing is getting more expensive, which is maybe fine for the existing homeowner, but if you're buying into a community, it's getting harder and harder to afford to buy that home because that price point has been going up all over. We take a real development orientation to housing market analysis because you can run these numbers and do this research, but developers are the ones that build housing, and their perceptions of what their interest in a community and what it would take to do different products in a community, I think brings a different level of information to a community. So we interviewed these 5 individuals for this project. It builds on the work we just did in Janesville, which is a similarly situated community. I wouldn't say it's not on the river, so it's missing one of the big amenities, but a similar situated community, similar size, and talked to another 5 or 8 developers there. So really have gotten a lot of developer perspectives on what's being built in these kind of communities and why. So we heard a little bit about development getting more expensive, but in a lot of cases, those rents are that they can ask are keeping up, and there continues to be a market that wants to occupy those apartments. We're seeing, in terms of apartment development, 2 formats in communities like this. One is tries to keep costs down and rents down by surface parking or garage parking on the lot. And they may or may not have elevators. They might be stairs. So you can get a high quality development without some of those bells and whistles for a pretty affordable price. And some developers are really focusing on that. There's a less commonly, but I think it's Umbro Falls, so in a nearby community, someone came in to do to their downtown. You might be familiar with this development, higher quality development that actually has some structured parking in it, elevators in the building. So, your climate controlled parking, you get a little more density on the site, and that's right in their downtown. So that may be possible here on a site near your downtown. So I just call those out in terms of the formats that are being built, the apartment formats that are being built. Based on all this information, we're, you could think of this as a summary of what we're seeing as the needs. And some of this is informed by, what the stakeholder community is saying. Certainly the populations that have needs are the businesses. They would like more housing options, so it's easier to hire people. We are, in terms of what housing that we're missing, we'd like to have more housing that's suitable for young adults and families with children. We want to house seniors in different ways, as we've talked about. And we know there's a need for additional lower income housing. And I'd say lower to moderate income housing. And I put this under a workforce housing context. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that section, what that means specifically. In terms of housing types, apartment developments, meet the needs of young adults and seniors. I think starter homes are a particularly important niche. Janesville did this really well in a subdivision they sponsored where they have, sort of a mid-level single-family homes, but they also paired that with twin homes, with patio homes, with some townhomes. So all of that mix meets different needs for different people, depending on their income level and their housing needs. So housing is needed across the price and rent continuum. I'm going to say this number and then I'm going to just de-emphasize it as much as I possibly can. Okay. But we came up with an estimate of a potential for attracting 600 new housing units to Wabasha. And I'm not even going to talk about the methodology for that because I'm going to give you a bunch of caveats for that. One of the caveats for that is that number would depend on building a wide variety of housing. So you're absorbing that demand for people with different needs. If you are just interested in doing more single family homes, you're not going to get close to that. If you're just interested in doing, market rate apartments, you're not going to get close to it. So it depends on building a lot of different types. So you're really attracting a lot of different kinds of people. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, and
What is that based on? Is it based on population projections or what did you come up with 600?
can I get back to the next slide and then ask me if I've answered your question? The other thing it depends on in any of these categories of demand, and this gets into the strategies, it depends on the public sector playing a role. So that you're doing something different. If you're going to attract apartments, there's going to need to be some market rate apartments. There's going to need to be some subsidy, a reasonable amount of subsidy. We'll talk about that. Each of these requires a public sector role. It requires doing something different because, again, if you're not doing something different, you're going to get that 10 units a year that we looked at on that chart. Okay, I'm going to actually talk a little bit about economics. So if anybody wants to just turn around, face the wall, you're welcome to do it. But here's the market study industry has done us a disservice, I think, in telling us that we can objectively arrive at a number that represents the demand, the potential demand for housing. And here's the reason for that. Here's the current production at the existing level of price of housing and at the existing level of hardship that a developer has to go through to produce that housing. So if you make that easier, you tee that up better, you're taking actions that make it less expensive for that developer to build it, then you're moving it down in this direction, and the price can sell for less. Now, if the price sells for less, there's a higher level of demand. It results in more demand. So there's not just one level of demand. Now, in Wabasha, since you have a local economy, that, the assumption is the local economy stays roughly the same. You've got that base economy, you have some industry. Given your current level of local economy, we can think long-term that you're not going to probably have a lot more working people here than you are jobs here. Right now, there's this mismatch, right? So, and based on conversations with developers about their willingness to come in and do work here, their interest in coming in to work here, and thinking about these different housing types that all meet a different market, qualitatively, subjectively, we came to the opinion that if you decide you want to take action on all of these fronts, on all these different housing types, 600 might be about the most you can achieve given the current economy. So that's the methodology. I think I have another chart here that shows.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
We weren't gonna do that, but I'm like, Tom, can I be announcing 600 minutes at meetings? He's like, I'd rather not. But it's a number for all of us to secretly keep in mind. But the message is more the diversity and price diversity and type diversity than all of us putting the banner 600 units,
Not a
you know.
marketing problem, it's an investment
So, yeah.
issue, yeah.
Think about though, if here's where you start to tie that back to, the future of Wabasha, right? Because think if you decide to take a number of these actions, and so you push to 200 or 400 or 500 units, you're not far from doubling the population of Wabasha. Now that supports your local businesses. It gives you a much more robust economy. You have a healthier tax base. So the schools do better. So this, when you're thinking big like this in the abstract level, you can see how it ties to the future health of the community.
Yeah, that's helpful.
When we get into the strategies, we're going to start to talk about what does this strategy take? What does this strategy take? What does this strategy take? So the other thing that I feel like is really important responsibility of an analyst like me is also to say that what this depends on. And for each of the strategies, it depends on something different. We're not just going to say that's possible. And then some communities want to say, oh, okay, we're put the card up. That's how many we can take. And the developers are going to flood in. But each of these strategies has, looks a little different. So we can move on to the housing strategy section here. And we've had a good conversation about a lot of different strategies that can advance the ball in Wabasha. Some of them we've got them categorized under production strategies. This is new housing stock of different kinds. Site-specific strategies. You were already working on specific sites. This affirms those and talks a little bit about next steps in those.
One of the sites that's listed for those that haven't been at the table, River Crossing is what we're referring to as the current athletic fields. Everybody knows what Eagles Basin is. And then the Main Street opportunity, there is city-owned, underutilized property at the end of East Main Street, mirroring the current 4 townhomes at the end at the terminus of Main Street, and is that Washington, I think. So that's what that site is.
The preservation strategy, the only preservation strategy we have on here is for your mobile home parks. There are some smart things you can do to help folks continue to reinvest in those structures, or even to convert it into a more stable long-term model of ownership. So we can talk about that. And the capacity building strategies are about how you might gear yourself up financially to tackle some of these other things. Some of them don't need any special funds. Some of these can rely only on leveraging the property taxes that are generated from that project itself. But other strategies would benefit from having raised some capital to support it, and that's part of what we'll talk about here. Anybody else need a breath? Wow. Okay, I'll keep walking through this. So let me just hold on. I just want to take a glance at, so we know what's coming up. Looks like I have left more. I wonder if I got my, I think I might have got some things crossed here because there's more in here than I actually intended to talk about. How about if I pick out 5 to talk about? I'm going to pick out some of the ones that are
mine, or
what's
I
that?
think I have less on my PowerPoint.
You have less on yours?
Mhm. It as long as you know where you're skipping to.
Let's,
Your first one was River Crossing.
And the
My
committee
first-
understands them all, I think, sufficiently. We can
Mhm.
always-
Yeah.
let's do that. So River Crossing is the site that the mayor was just referring to. And it would be paired with one or more developers that do market rate apartment development. It is most likely to be attractive to developers if it's teed up in a way that they can come in and do their piece. And the good news about this is that folks here are working on getting grants for building some of the infrastructure here, which would be a huge initial step towards getting it done. It's a very attractive site in how close it is to Main Street. This is the kind of location where you want multifamily development because they can walk and support your Main Street stores. It's got a little buffering to the single family neighborhoods, especially on what would that be, the west side, I think, because the water's on the west side. So really nice side, and there's an interest in it being a little bit of a mixed use development, so there could be some retail in the development as well. What's the next one?
Land trust.
No.
Hmm?
No,
That
I'm gonna go
was
back to, this.
Okay.
So 3 of the production strategies are
Oh.
market rate
no, I did
apartments,
have that, sorry.
workforce apartments, and subdivision strategies. And I think these are things that as a city council, you want to have a good handle on what these look like, okay? So this is the market rate apartments development. It's important to know that if you look under case studies, you can see that some examples of developers that are building in communities like this. And in fact, in my research, I reached out to Bob Engstrom, I think his name is, with Sleepy Eye, or with Alliance Building Corporation. And he's really interested in Wabasha. He's based out of Wade Park near St. Cloud. He likes to build a product that starts with 50 units and the utilities are all on one side. And then if it leases up the way he expects it to, then he'll build 30 units on the other side. And it doesn't have to be just a straight building. It can bend and it can be a nice quality design. I think the photo is actually from one of the buildings that he built. So he's built 6 or 8 of these in communities like this. It will take some financial support. Teeing up the development with sites that are ready to go is really useful, although not necessarily required. I'm sure he has partnered on some of that. And then there will be a requirement for some tax abatement or tax increment financing for a certain number of years. That's a revenue stream that comes from his property taxes that you can front load to help support the development. And then the city doesn't take in those property taxes to the city's general fund for that period of time, for 10 or 15 years. And then after that point in time, those property tax revenues come to the city. So you're funding the development just from property taxes that come from the new development, which you weren't receiving anyway. So that's market rate apartment development. I do want to talk about, and let's look at the rent levels on this. So in this development he built in Gaylord, he was charging $950 for 1-bedroom units and $1,300 for 2-bedroom units. I bet that's 50% higher than the average rents in Wabasha. But he's finding a market for those. There's enough people that want that newer product and are willing to pay that rent level. Rent restricted workforce housing. So this is a model let's start here with the rent levels. So on this, in this project, this is a Three Rivers Community Action Project, and they're charging $715 for a 2-bedroom apartment and $830 for a 3-bedroom apartment. So you can see the rents are quite a bit less. What was I going to say? Again, what I was going to say again is that's still probably mid-range, the rents in Wabasha. And the quality of construction is every bit the same as the workforce housing development. The financing model makes heavy use of a national resource called tax credits that brings investor dollars into it. It will also, like the other one, will also take some local financial support. Again, tax increment financing is the main local source of that. Would mean the new tax revenues for a period of time, property tax revenues, would go to support that project. These are both great options for Wabasha, and you can see where they're hitting different populations that have different needs, which is what we want to be doing. Subdivision strategies. I don't have a picture here to make this slide better. You're experienced with subdivisions. They're seeing a modest level of growth. This is an area where there are some communities that are starting to say, okay, if we want to get more growth, develop more homes, if we want to have some of our preferences in terms of mixing those homes up, some of them are patio homes, some of them are twin homes, some of them are townhomes, have a little more control. If we want to see these subdivisions happen where the existing sewer and water hookups are, rather than having to extend them somewhere else, we should think about taking a little bit more control, being a little more proactive, playing a little different role. And so we do have some example communities that have, I think of it as the land development continuum. It's not about being the developer. It's about being the land developer that tees up a subdivision that works with a wide variety of products. It's got to have the green space. It's got to have the bike connectivity. So it's got to be an attractive community. But within that community, you can have that wide range of homes from your average, your average new home to some of those smaller formats, even to a tiny home format, which we're going to talk about later, and build it as a high quality neighborhood that's got assets and retains its value. Kathy.
I think a lot of people are always familiar with how did Florida's villages expand? And they've kind of used one of those case studies to bond and to pass on those costs.
Yeah.
Can you kind of share? Because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Wow, I don't know about Florida's example. But the examples we have here, Janesville is a city that did this. It created a subdivision, it bought the land, it put in the utilities, it platted it for this really nice mix of housing types and had a response to that. Now, it also, unfortunately, the economy turned down in 2010. So the risk of this is about economic ups and downs. The economy turned and they had a hole to fill to repay the debt that they took out to finance this. But that's a land developer role. In Sleepy Eye, the city administrator there did the same thing. They bought the land, they put in the streets and utilities, sold the lots. It went beautifully. They got the mix they wanted, they got the location they wanted. In that case, they had cash on hand to do that. So they did it with cash. Now, if the economy had slowed down, when you have cash on hand, it's not a worry. You don't have debt you're paying. So one of the ideas here in terms of raising a capital fund is to start to build a fund that would be revolving to invest in the next subdivision as that gets bought and paid out, reimbursed by the new homeowners. Then you've got money to pay for the next subdivision with cash, so you're not at risk. So some of these strategies have to do with a lot of these strategies have to do with that public sector role, and we're finding more communities that are doing this, but it's still not common. The only thing is, if you want to do it differently, if you want to have more housing growth in the ownership housing spectrum, and if you want to see some of that ownership housing be mixed and not all at the mid to upper income levels, have to start considering that. So those are the three production strategies. This is just really an interesting model that could fit in a range of places. There's a former developer who decided, I'm really interested in setting up a factory to build tiny homes. And these are homes that the smallest of them is 16 feet by 20 feet. It's kind of an efficiency living space, probably similar in size to a mobile home, right? And they can be prefabbed and set up on site, fully hooked up for $100,000. Now you're talking a whole nother level of affordability, still in an ownership product. And, you know, you can brainstorm about, is this something that replaces some lots in mobile home parks? Is this something where in a subdivision with a mix of products, there's a little cul-de-sac with tiny homes, you know, I don't know. So, but it's an interesting model. Talked about river crossing. I was gonna skip that one. And we touched on this one. And I think I kind of want to get to the conversations. So I'm moving through a little bit. We've also touched on this one. Here's something to think about. Every time a property is built in Wabasha, it generates a revenue stream, property taxes. That's what's paying for all your city operations. If there was a mentality that the first 5 years or 5% of that lifetime of revenues to the city is invested in expanding the development of housing, you know, getting sites ready, doing some of these proactive strategies. Now you've doubled or tripled your flow, and you continue to have that first 5% resource that can be a fund. This is one way to build a fund that the state might match and double your funds. So I think I'm gonna stop there. Just put a lot of ideas on the table, put a lot of analysis on the table. And I hope I didn't overwhelm you all too much. Oh, I take it back. I'm gonna give some recommendations. So my recommendation is that you pursue all of these production strategies. I think it benefits Wabasha to grow like that. You have, and on the right side of the paper, you have folks in the development community that would be interested in doing something here. You've got momentum to tee up some key sites. You've got another developer who is really interested in doing a workforce housing project. And you can start to set yourself up for some of the ownership housing strategies as well. Doesn't mean you have to start them all today, right? But over time, I think it benefits Wabasha to set a goal. And we're gonna be pioneering and assertive in all these areas because we see the benefit it brings back to our community if we set ourselves on this kind of growth path. So that's the recommendation that I wasn't sure if I should make. The last thing here is continue to learn from some of these other communities because there are a lot of good examples out there doing that. All right, now discussion.
Did anyone write down anything on their card?
Did anyone write down, what is this guy smoking?
So I think just because of the number of people and we could just say questions out loud. If people didn't write anything, oh no, there's one, okay.
Oh, that was exciting. Sorry, Jeff.
All right, it woke me up.
Or maybe we can give you guys a few moments to write down a comment or question. I have one that I got ahead of the meeting that the person is not here, that we can start it off while people are all thinking. I got a question, I think, in the community, there's been, what is the difference between the workforce apartment development that we're talking about and then the Section 8 housing that we may be familiar with Maple Grove Apartments?
Yeah.
That was a question I got ahead of this meeting.
I mean, both serve a really important purpose, right? Both need to be well maintained and well managed. They are meeting needs of different populations because the Section 8 buildings that Semcra owns and manages, the rent is structured so that the people are working people who live there, they have jobs, but the rent is structured so that they're paying 30% of their incomes for their rent, and the federal government is making up the difference. So they're paying different levels of rents, probably for the most part, less than what you're seeing in the workforce model that we showed. In that model, there's a set length or rent that is considered to be affordable to people making 50 or 60% of the median income in the area. So there's a set rent, and there's people have to qualify. They need to make not more than probably the same, not more than 60% of the area median income to qualify for those units. So I think it means that, the Section 8 buildings are meeting needs for people who are lower income than the workforce housing folks.
Would you also add that when an apartment building is built for workforce, it's not that every unit will be for 60%, they do allow mixes as well. So once they formulate their tax credit project, doesn't mean that every single unit will be in that qualification, but they do have to set certain numbers aside.
Yeah,
And I think that's what's key that really sets it apart too.
Well, that's good for continuity. So if somebody comes in making $19 an hour in an entry level job and then
Yeah.
themselves non-qualifying, they may still have an apartment in that same.
that's right.
Yeah.
And in that model, that's an alternative model. And in that model, the mix is from 30% of the area median income to 80% of the area median income. And I think for the reasons you said, Mayor, it's getting to be preferred because it allows movement within the building.
Okay, a lot of good questions that are coming in. Okay, let's start with this one. The person has excellent handwriting. Is there one specific strategy you believe we can start on sooner than others to start showing progress?
I can say what I think is the easiest strategy. It's not necessarily the most impactful strategy. But just from a city perspective, I think it's one we didn't discuss here. I think the easiest strategy is to adopt an accessory dwelling unit ordinance that allows every existing homeowner that's interested to build a little apartment add-on to their house. Here's the strategy. And what we have found in communities that have done this is it doesn't mean automatic willy-nilly, everybody's doing it. It's just people that are, and it's a little difficult to get through plan review for these things, but just people that really have sort of energy, oftentimes for their own parents or young kids, or they just want a little rental income, they have to be pretty motivated. And so we see just a little of this happen at a time. And I think it makes neighborhoods interesting. It can raise concerns about traffic, but a few units going here and there are not going to, in the big picture, make a big difference in traffic. So that's a low hanging fruit strategy.
Yeah.
All you have to do is write the ordinance that it's legal.
I think in R1 we have that already, don't we?
Oh,
We confirm with Wendy, no, it's not possible to do an accessory
Well, we've
dwelling
done-
unit.
A few of them already.
I think, I don't know, if Wendy was on the line.
What's the threshold?
What?
I thought Wendy said that plumbing wouldn't be allowed to plummet. Is that what she?
Yeah,
what is the-
I don't know.
Yeah.
I can confirm that with her, but
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, we'll talk with her and you
Yeah.
can tell her the examples. Here's a question. One of the primary strategies is the river crossing site. Will the river crossing site flourish with the truck traffic passing nearby?
I don't know that I'm the expert on that, but I will say that, I see how there's a lot of just baked in amenities and strengths to that location. And I don't know, you guys drive around and you get
I
up to
have an
this,
answer to that. So I look for that in communities where it's like the highways are right up by residential, and I think, what would that be like? Well, it's 65 miles an hour, it's a little bit different than coming off a bridge. And we already have that same truck traffic stopping and starting and stopping and starting and stopping and starting, which I think is the more problematic through our residential areas. So I have a sliver of an optimist in me. I'm usually a really, really, really pragmatic thinker, but I keep thinking if it's developed appropriately and they're facing the slough or they're facing those reflected neighborhoods that have townhomes. And I just think if it's done appropriately, first of all, that we're gonna pedestrianize, if we can accomplish that, we're gonna pedestrianize that roadway. That will improve all of the accessibility around it, and that doesn't exist right now. So my thought is it'll certainly be better than what we have existing.
you can build a landscape buffer.
Yeah.
Right,
And the houses that are under the bridge now, they sell fast. Nobody cares.
yeah, and it eliminate the J perking coming down because
Right.
it is flow, because
Exactly.
we experienced that at our house,
Yeah.
that J perking.
Yeah.
I can't hear, so it doesn't bother me.
What I was gonna say is developers aren't put off by that stuff the way you
No.
think they would
No
be.
offense.
You see stuff going by train tracks, by highways, a lot in the Twin Cities, a lot of them are just by,
Urban development, I mean,
Yeah.
it's-
I live by both. the highway
Um,
and the train track.
they see it as marketing.
Yeah.
If it's by a highway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's another question on just like opportunities for sites. Long-term opportunities, may we add the barn used by the chamber as a site for future development? Or a mix of 55 plus in our study strategy goals. So I don't know that that came across, but it's something that council kind of talked about is the current chamber site, but they're giving up Grandpa's barn and not necessarily gonna hang on that long term.
And the.
Yeah, so I think that could be a question for maybe council discussion.
There's
Or,
been some exploration,
We've
because I know.
done
when
that. Chad
first-
and I have
yeah.
looked into that
a
thoroughly. We
challenging
just couldn't
site.
find a developer that wanted to do it. It's too
Okay.
small.
small
Parking,
site,
yeah,
No
yeah.
Parking,
Yeah.
big problem.
but an excellent, if it was
Yeah,
bigger
you'll have to live
parcel,
there if
it
you can
would
have what
be-
you need.
I
the
think
location.
it could be added, and if we find somebody
Yeah.
interested, that would be fine.
Maybe a local person.
Maybe a
would
local
see the
person.
value of it.
Yeah. So I think that could be added there. And okay, I'm gonna keep going. Are tiny homes one of the strategies for the Main Street area? So I don't know if this person was writing this concerned or writing this, yes, let's do tiny homes in Main Street. So I don't think your strategy was location specific,
It
but,
was now.
okay.
And
Sorry,
I'd say something about that, even though that site has fill issues, et cetera, there are tiny homes as a precedent on that
Yep.
section of the street, so I think that's a reasonable question.
Are you have residential apartments above some of those buildings too, don't you?
Oh, you're talking about Main Street?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're thinking Main Street and
We're
I'm
talking
thinking
the other end.
small end
East
Main
end,
Street.
yeah.
Okay,
oh, small and Main Street, okay.
but that was
Uh,
for capital and Main Street.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that could be. Yeah. But-
Yeah, that's a really small parcel.
Yeah.
We'd have to buy the adjoining.
We
on
talked
market,
about
and that would be
finding, taking a proactive strategy as a
Correct.
port authority to purchase that parcel that we don't own to make it big enough to get
Right.
something built there. So,
Might be
I see that.
interesting to have a little spot of tiny homes there.
yeah.
There are some.
Or just a little ways.
Are there,
In the front.
When you walk.
are there
Exactly.
concerns with losing family homes to Verbos and other such businesses? Was that a discussion we had about losing family homes to Verbos and Airbnbs?
Oh,
That's a good question.
What about ordinances? That can be structured, right? through
it
ordinance.
can be your rental licensing ordinances can take that on
Mhm.
and can. They can do you have a rental licensing? ordinance?
Yes.
Okay.
Registration process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you wanted to strengthen that, you can, I know that the one I'm most familiar with is City of Minneapolis, which I know is a really different setting, but they restrict it to a certain number of days a year. If you don't want to like enter the whole rental licensing thing process. And that seemed to work pretty well for them. I think most people are not doing it full time because of that.
I think there's a market saturation with respect to that kind of stuff.
Right.
And, it's always gonna be present in our community, which is probably a good thing because it introduces people to the community. But it doesn't stop us from developing some of these other areas, and I think that temporary rental market will ebb and flow into those.
There's
into
people
our
who would
neighborhoods.
keep their current home and make it a VRBO and move into a different house.
Mhm.
And I don't think that lasts forever. I don't think people are doing this and thinking they're gonna do it for the next 30 years in that structure. You know,
Just anecdotally, we had somebody in saying they really found it hard to lease up their Airbnb during winter in Wabasha, and they were now thinking of renting out the apartment for a long-term tenant because the Airbnb business model wasn't working out as they envisioned. They made a lot of money in summer, but none in winter. And then, so they were now thinking, yeah, why don't maybe take on a long-term renter? And anecdotally, when we introduced our registration process, we had a property owner sell off a couple properties, just not wanting to register, but I don't know if they're gonna stay Verbo or not, I can't remember. Next question, can you provide an example of communities who have forfeited property tax for growth? Where are they now? Are they adopting this strategy for phase 2 and 3?
Well, any community that has attracted apartment development used a TIF is forfeiting a certain number of years of property tax for that development to come. Now, again, that's property tax they wouldn't have been getting anyway if the building wasn't there. But that first 15 years of property taxes or 20, or I think it can be up to 25. Is being forfeited, and then you collect the revenue after that. So, and there are communities that have gone beyond being the land developer for single family homes and also offered, the first 5 years of that home's life tax-free. So there are additional incentives you can layer on, and I would argue that you're still getting a tremendous benefit from that home, even if even if that first, you're not getting taxes for that first 5 years, if you're rebating that to the homeowner. So,
And one example of a community is Wabasha, Eagles Basin. We are currently forfeiting tax revenue to have seen Eagle Basin get built and build in all that infrastructure.
Lake City, Pine Island, Chatfield, Austin, it's like really numerous.
But those homeowners are still eating at the restaurant and shopping at the grocery store. and
Exactly.
going to the town.
5-10 years goes fast,
It goes fast.
it does.
like the clinic, 10-year baby went by so fast, now we're getting.
We've done TIF districts here.
Right.
Several of them.
Yeah.
I think we've had one that's probably textbook failure, and that's the one that was out on the highway. The
Mm.
rest of them all been great success.
Mm.
For downtown remodel, downtown development.
Yeah.
So that's a tool that. I'll use it.
Do we know if the legislators this year changed the law as far as using TIFs to fund market rate developments? Because I think there was talk of them doing that, because right now you can only use TIF if you have some subsidized, housing. And they were supposed to talk about changing it so you can use it for just.
That's a
plain
good
market
question.
rate TIF.
And it depends on which TIF you're using too. If you're using a housing TIF, there does have to be a certain number of affordable units
Yes,
in
and
there.
that's what they were talking
Yeah.
about changing, so you could just develop market rates. using
Right,
TIF.
right. I'd like to find out. That's a good
Yeah.
question. But the restrictions they're looking on for that TIF aren't super onerous. Even with those restrictions, it's a certain number of percentage of the units, 20% of the units have to be at affordable at 60%, and that 60% level isn't a lot below what people would be charging for rent anyway.
And we have that consultant with Minnesota Housing Partnership, and they stay really on top of that legislation, so we could save that